Honourable Member for Mount Pearl South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's certainly a pleasure to rise in this honourable House and have a few words on the budget. Before I do, Mr. Speaker, I do want to take the opportunity to wish the Minister of Environment well on her retirement. Certainly, we all know in this House of Assembly, despite the fact that we may banter back and forth, we may have different views and opinions on things. We certainly don't agree on everything, that's for sure. But one thing we all can agree on is that politics can be a tough racket. It does have an impact on your family life and so on. And so I do want to wish her well in her retirement and thank her for her service to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Speaker, there's a number of things I could speak on, and so I'm going to try to take them one at a time here. And I'm not going to concentrate on the budget per se. I think my colleagues have certainly, spoken to a number of issues, pointed out a number of issues, concerns we have with the budget as it relates to the debt, as it relates to future projections, which all seem to be trending down while debt is trending upward. But a few of the things I want to just touch on, I've spoken about these in the House before, Mr. Speaker, but I just want to get it out there for the record again. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I just want to speak about the Peak Pond development. And, Mr. Speaker, I was contacted by some people in my district who actually had summer homes out in the Peak Pond area, Reeds Pond area. And, Mr. Speaker, there's a proposal has been brought forward to put a waste transfer facility at that location. And I presented a number of petitions on behalf of not just the cabin owners and the liviers, because there's actually people who actually live all year round in Peak Pond and Reeds Pond. But in addition to that, we've been getting petitions coming in from people from, Whitburn, Dildo, and all of those other communities in the area who have real concerns about this transfer facility, which is also including in the proposal a organics collection facility. And of course, they have concerns about environmental issues. They have concerns about rodents, odour, unsightliness, litter, and there's a whole list of concerns, issues around the actual wildlife there, because they do have moose and ducks and rabbits and loons and geese and all that up there. So, Mr. Speaker, nobody certainly is against having a waste transfer facility. There are 6 other facilities across the island. And the reason for having them, of course, is so that people have a location where they can bring their bulk garbage and so on, so it doesn't end up in the woods. We don't want that to happen. So that's why it's being put there. And everybody supports the need for such a site. I think the location is the issue. And so I'm recommending, and the residents have been recommending, we need to look at industrial sites in the area, such as the former Whitburn dump would be an ideal site. I know they had looked at it at one point in time, but apparently there was some, I understand there was some private individual that had put in a proposal to do something at that site, but I think that's since gone off the table. So I think they should look at that site. And if not that site, then I'm sure there are other industrial sites, whether it be some rock quarries or other former industrial sites. And it doesn't make sense to destroy the environment in a beautiful, pristine area when there are other industrial sites or former industrial sites that they could use. So I certainly encourage the government to look at that, to work with Eastern Waste to find a more suitable site. And I will continue to bring this issue forward on behalf of the residents and the cabin owners, as I said, a number of them from my district. Mr. Speaker, talking about, waste management, I just wanted to raise an issue, bring it to the attention of the Minister of Works Services and Transportation, or Transportation and Works, an issue around garbage. And, Mr. Speaker, may seem like a minor issue, but I think it's worthy to raise for sure. I'm speaking about the outer ring road, Mr. Speaker, and certainly if you go along the outer ring road, the median there is a real total mess. There's garbage in it everywhere. We've certainly seen two car accidents, I believe, last week. Two separate car accidents. There was one last week where somebody ran over a piece of pipe or something that actually ended up going through I think it was the grill of the car or whatever. And there's a couple of issues there. Well, first of all, it certainly needs to be cleaned up. It is the responsibility of the provincial government. And certainly there are there's traffic going back and forth there all the time, going back and forth to and from the airport, a lot of tourists and so on, and it's very, very unsightly, and so I encourage the government to deal with that. The other issue, of course, is where is the debris coming from, and I believe that much of the debris is coming from trucks that are bringing garbage to the Robin Hood Bay facility, and I think that obviously those trucks are not properly covered and so on. I do believe there are regulations around the covering, proper covering of those trucks that are transporting garbage, and certainly I encourage the government through, I guess, the RNC or maybe highway enforcement to start looking at that and enforcing that, and that would alleviate the mess, and it would alleviate the safety concerns that are created from debris out there. So I did want to make a mention of that as well. Mr. Speaker, another issue which I've brought forward here now in terms of petitions in the House of Assembly, and I want to speak on again, just briefly, is the 1.6 kilometre school bus rule. And Mr. Speaker, you know, this is something that I've had a number of calls, emails and discussions with parents, certainly from my district, and I know my colleagues have as well. On this one point, I know the member from Harbour Grace Carbonear has raised this issue as well, and it's around the 1.6 kilometre rule for busing. And Mr. Speaker, this really comes down to a safety concern, particularly when you have children who you know, are having to and small children are required, if they're walking, they're required to have to cross these busy roads, and like I said, some areas they don't even have sidewalks, and that's a real safety concern. And of course this has made even more dangerous of a situation in the winter time when the snow clearing, when you have snow clearing issues and the sidewalks are not snow cleared. And you know, we certainly heard a number of issues raised by residents in the city of St. John's, for example, this past winter, people complaining about the fact that sidewalks weren't cleared. Well, now you can imagine now, if you don't have the sidewalks cleared, you've got very young children having to get to school, they don't have sidewalks to walk on. That's a real recipe for disaster, Mr. Speaker. So I think that's something that really needs to be looked at. I know specifically in my district, as a result of the school reorganization in Mount Pearl with St. Peter's Elementary and Newtown Elementary, one of the issues, there were many issues there, and I'm going to speak to that as well, but there was a number of issues, but one of the issues is the fact that there were a number of families who, for example, moved in close to Newtown Elementary. So say for argument's sake they moved in on Munden Drive. They wanted their kids to go to a neighbourhood school. Now because of this change that's going to happen in September, they can no longer go to the school right next door. Now they have to get the kids over to St. Peter's Elementary and vice versa. And that may require busing for some because not everybody, unfortunately, has a vehicle. Not everybody, while we have a great economy, there's no doubt there's people who are not necessarily doing so well, and getting the kids to school is a real issue because they don't have a vehicle. And the problem is that even though they have to go to different schools, they're within the 1.6. So there could be someone on, say, Munden Drive, who their child would just basically just go down the street to the school. Now they got to go to St. Peter's Elementary, crossing over 4-lane roads, busy roads, but they're probably like 1.2 kilometres away. So when we're talking very young children, K to 6 children in particular, it's a real safety concern. It's something that has been raised a number of times with me. As I said, I've presented petitions, as have some of my colleagues, and we'll continue to do so and continue to push this issue. Interestingly, government did issue a study on that. It was, I forget the name of the company that did, Deloitte. And they spent $75,000 on a school bus study, the provincial government did. And one of the recommendations that came from that report was that the 1.6 kilometres should be eliminated. But unfortunately, it was never done. And that's why it's interesting, like a lot of times when you see studies that are done, we talk about money, right? There's all kinds of money being spent on studies, right? But the problem is, a lot of times you'll hear the minister will get up and say on a particular study, well, we accepted the study, we accepted the recommendations, and that leads people to believe that you're going to actually implement the recommendations. That's not what it means. When they say we've accepted it, it just means thank you very much, we accept your report. Doesn't mean we're going to implement what's in the report.
You're right.
And unfortunately, and it's interesting because you spend all this money on these studies, on these reports, you would think the whole purpose of it is to find out what are the issues, what are the recommendations to correct those particular issues or concerns, and then you would think they would implement them. No, not the case. Spend a pile of money on a study, accept it by simply saying thank you very much, but do nothing with it. That's what happened in this particular case, and so we still have that safety issue ongoing as it relates to the 1.6 kilometre rule for school busing. And since I've raised this and brought forward petitions on behalf of constituents I represent, I've been getting calls now and emails and so on from people in St. John's, people in the Goulds, Paradise, and I've actually got a couple of others from people in some of the rural parts of the province as well. So it's definitely an issue, definitely something that government should be looking into for sure. Mr. Speaker, another issue which I've raised and presented petitions on and so on, I want to again bring attention to it, is the issue around blue zone parking. And of course we know, Mr. Speaker, that the whole purpose for blue zone parking is to provide access for persons who have mobility challenges. And whether that be to a public facility or whether it be to private facilities. And 2 years ago, in the House of Assembly, there was new legislation which came forward. Everybody agreed with it. We voted unanimously in favour of it. And 2 years later, we still see many commercial establishments around the city, around the region, around the province that are not in compliance. They either don't have blue zones, or they don't have enough blue zones, or they're not the sufficient width, or in many cases they don't have permanent signage. And the purpose of the legislation in particular dealt with the permanent signage. Now I would ask the member from Cape Lahoon, if she got something to say, then when she has her opportunity she can get up and say it. I didn't interrupt her. I'd appreciate the same courtesy. Anyway, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, that's why it was put in place, to have proper regulations to ensure people had access. Well, Mr. Speaker, we've seen examples all over the place where that's not happening, and it comes down to enforcement. So, again, I'm just going to call upon the Minister of Service NL to start enforcing their own regulations. Not only are we not seeing it enforced on commercial establishments, not even happening in government-owned facilities. So, the St. Clair's Hospital, Health Sciences, Workers' Compensation Building, a number of liquor stores, AES offices, been around, looked at them, not in compliance. Now, I have to say that Newfoundland Labrador Housing, which wasn't in compliance, I got a message from NLHC last week with the picture showing that they're now in compliance. They had the blue zones, they never had the signs, now they got the signs. So I'm glad to see that Mr. Sims and people at Newfoundland Labrador Housing obviously have been listening, and they obviously corrected it, and that's good for them. I would ask that all other departments do the same, so we can provide proper access by law, by our own regulations, for the people who need it and deserve it. And I don't think that's too much to ask. It's not a big cost or nothing involved. It's only a matter of somebody to actually do what they're supposed to do, put in place. Now, Mr. Speaker, another issue which I raised today, I asked a question on, was bicycle helmet safety and the need for legislation here in the province. And Mr. Speaker, this has been asked for by my colleagues over the last couple of years, because it certainly is a safety issue. Certainly something that's been endorsed by the Canadian Medical Association, Newfoundland and Labrador Medical Association. I believe we had some physicians as well at the Janeway, spoke out about it like a year ago, and saying we really should have bicycle helmet legislation. To date, we don't have them. We're dumping it over on the municipalities. Municipalities that don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place to deal with it, to enforce it, and so on, don't have the resources. And even then, it's like a bylaw, which I'm not sure what kind of teeth the bylaw would actually have and how hard it would be to actually find somebody or deal with somebody who's not compliant. So I'm calling on the provincial government here again tonight to implement bicycle helmet legislation as they have in most other provinces. Now, I was encouraged that the Minister of Service NL did say they were looking at it, doing a review, so I'm hopeful that once the House convenes again in the fall, that there will be bicycle helmet legislation in place, or it'll be brought forward for us to debate. I hope so, and we'll certainly be watching that for sure. Mr. Speaker, I've only got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to as well speak about the seniors, Mr. Speaker, and this has been referenced as well. And you know, it's very important that we do all that we possibly can as a government to ensure that our seniors are looked after. And Mr. Speaker, you know, we realise, everybody acknowledges the fact that, you know, economically, certainly in this part of the island, economically we're doing well overall. There's no doubt about it. Now, indicators are showing that this is going to taper off and so on, but nonetheless, in this particular area, we're doing pretty good. I don't think people can deny it. But not everybody is doing good. Because of the price of housing going up, the price of rent going up, the price of fuel going up, the price of food going up, and everything else, people on fixed incomes, such as our seniors, are actually falling further behind. They're even further behind. Now, granted, the government does have a number of programs in place. The residential energy repair program and the provincial home repair program and the energy efficiency grant, and you know, there's a number of different, the home heating rebate. There's a number of good programs that the government has in place, and I applaud the government for each and every one of them. I think it's a good thing, supported 100%. But that being said, there's still more that we need to do. There's still more we need to do, and I'll be the first one. I've said it in this House many times, money doesn't grow on trees. And I'll say it over on this side like I said on that side. Money doesn't grow on trees, and we need to ensure, though, that we need to prioritize what we're doing to ensure that seniors and the disadvantaged and the low-income people in our society are not falling through the cracks, and that they're being looked after, and we need to do so. Mr. Speaker, I'm down to my last 30 seconds, so I'll just end off by saying, Mr. Speaker, that there's no doubt that there are good things happening, and as our leader said, we're the first to acknowledge it, to give credit where credit is due for good things that are happening, but everything is not rosy. Everything isn't rosy. Everything is not perfect. And when we are bringing those issues forward, we're not being negative. We're only performing the role that we were given to perform, to bring these issues forward.
I remind the honourable member his time has expired.